Hi, welcome back. Hopefully by now you've watched my Welcome to Class video, and if you're new to AIB, you've also watched my How to Complete Your Assignments video. If not, I suggest that you watch these videos first just so we can both be on the same page before we start into the course. So what's the best way to learn how to use a software program like Dreamweaver? Well, if you're anything like me, I almost never read the instructions first for anything. I open up a box and start poking around and try to figure it out on my own. Later, if there's something in particular that stumps me or I can't find what I'm looking for, then I go into the help menus and tutorials to see if I can fill in the missing pieces. Does that sound familiar to you? As we get to know each other a little better, I think you'll discover that I believe the trial and error method is probably the best way to learn how to do something. Fact of the matter is, most people don't really need an instructor to learn how to use a software program. Let's face it, if you search Dreamweaver tutorials on Google, you'll get almost 7 million results. So why am I even here? Well, my purpose as an instructor is not so much to tell you where the buttons are located and when to push them, because you can figure those things out on your own. My role in this course is to help you answer the more difficult questions that start with why and how and which is better and which is more efficient and which is the smarter way to do it. So with that in mind, before we get into the specifics of how to use Dreamweaver, I think we should take a look at the history of web development, which has gone through some pretty dramatic changes over the last 25 years. So the internet that we all know today got its start back in the 1960s, mostly as a response to the Cold War and the fear of a Soviet attack. Military experts were claiming that just one missile could destroy our entire network of phone lines, which our government relied on for long-distance communication. So scientists from MIT came up with an idea for what they called a galactic network of computers. This would allow government leaders to communicate across long distances even if some of the parts of the phone system were destroyed. The technology was called packet switching, which breaks data down into blocks or packets. Then each packet is sent through different routes, different wires, and different computers to one final destination, where everything is put back together. The idea is that if one piece of the network were to be destroyed by a missile, those packets would simply be rerouted across different wires. By the end of the 1970s, a few computer scientists had expanded on the packet switching idea and developed a way for different computers on different networks to all communicate with one another. This was called Transmission Control Protocol, or TCP for short, and it transformed the internet into a much larger network where users could send and receive information and files to each other from all over the world. Then, in 1991, a computer programmer in Switzerland named Tim Berners-Lee introduced the idea of a World Wide Web. He thought the internet had much more potential than simply using it as a tool for sending files from one place to another. He saw the internet as a way to gather human knowledge and then share that information freely with everyone in the world. Of course, we take all this for granted today, but just 25 years ago, it was a fairly radical concept. This new idea of how the internet could be used quickly spurred the development of web browsers, which offered a more user-friendly way for people to search and retrieve information from the internet. One of the earliest web browsers to come along was called Mosaic, and it allowed people for the first time to see words and pictures on the same page, and to navigate using scroll bars and clickable links. In the same year that Mosaic was launched, Congress passed legislation that allowed people to use the web for commercial purposes. This immediately caused a flurry of companies to set up websites of their own. However, as more people started moving their business online, the web needed more than just the technology to make it work. It needed web pages that were attractive, web pages that were easier to navigate, and web pages that just made more sense to a visitor who might have never used a computer before. And that's where graphic designers came into the picture. But before they could apply their design skills in this new digital medium, they had to first learn the code that programmers had been using to build web pages. The code was called Hypertext Markup Language, or HTML for short, and it's the same type of code that you'll find behind all sites on the web today. There have been a few variations of the language introduced over the years. For example, you might hear people talk about XHTML, which is very similar to HTML, but it adds a little more versatility to what you can do on a website. Now, if you were a web designer back in the 1990s, creating a web page was a long and tedious process. Most of your work would be done in a text editing program like Notepad, where you would meticulously write line after line of HTML and then check your work by opening the document in a web browser. Well, it didn't take long for web designers to decide that this is not a very efficient or effective way to design anything. So in response to that problem, software companies started to develop programs that would provide a more visual interface for designers. These programs were commonly called WYSIWYG editors, which is an acronym for What You See is What You Get. One of the first widely used WYSIWYG editors to come on the scene was Microsoft FrontPage, which allowed designers to see both HTML and a web browser preview at the same time. The program also included web page templates with pre-formatted HTML, which helped lessen the tedious work of writing code from scratch. Both of these features made a tremendous impact on the overall quality of websites coming onto the web, and before long, all web designers were using some type of WYSIWYG editor to build websites. So here we are today, some 25 years later, and we now have more than 600 million active websites on the internet. And the most popular website software in the world is Dreamweaver, the very program you'll be learning to use in this course. Now, it's important to keep in mind that building a website requires not only an understanding of how to use Dreamweaver, but also a good understanding of graphic design principles and information architecture. Also keep in mind that when you build a website, you are building for a specific user. And that means designing pages that not only look good, but also make sense to visitors. These are all things we'll pay special attention to throughout this course, especially in the beginning stages of planning a website. Something else to keep in mind about web design is that over the years, the profession has become extremely diverse and specialized. Most websites you see on the web today are created by a team of internet professionals, each having their own specific role to play in getting a website published. For example, there are user interface designers, user experience designers, front-end web developers, back-end web developers, and a variety of other new job titles that seem to be added to the profession every day. I think the best way to look at the job landscape here is to divide the work into two categories: web design and web development. Web design, just as the name implies, is all about creating the visual appearance of a web page, which includes organizing the components on that page to help a visitor find the information he or she is looking for. Web development, in contrast, is more about creating the underlying systems that send and receive data to and from a website. Web developers often work with computer languages like PHP, ASP, and JavaScript. Of course, there are instances where web design and web development can cross paths. Certainly, there are web designers who do some development work and web developers who do some design work. It all depends on the individual and what skills and talent he or she brings to the table. In this course, we're going to focus primarily on web design, and that means creating what's often called the front end of a website. It's where visitors first interact with the site, using links, buttons, and navigation tools. As I mentioned earlier, some of the more important skills you'll learn in this course is how to apply good graphic design principles to a web page layout and how to use information architecture to help visitors find what they're looking for. If you can gain a firm, solid grip on these two concepts from the start, you'll be miles ahead of all those who mistakenly think that Dreamweaver will design their websites for them. For your assignments this week, I'd like to start by having you watch a video where Tim Berners-Lee speaks at the 18th Annual Webby Awards held this year. As you watch the video, make note of what Tim Berners-Lee says about net neutrality. If you're not familiar with the term, do a little online research this week to find out what net neutrality means and why it's part of a political battle taking place right now in governments all over the world. After you have watched the Tim Berners-Lee video, I'd like you to share some of your own thoughts about the internet and the web in our class forum. I'd also like you to tell me why you're interested in learning to use tools like Dreamweaver. Are you hoping to expand your business skills to be more versatile in the job market? Or maybe you've already had some experience building a website or creating a blog and you simply want to learn more about working in that medium. Whatever it is, I'd like to hear what you're hoping to get out of this course. This week's quiz covers some of the things I just talked about earlier in this video, like some of the more important events in the history of the web and some of the terminology commonly used in the web design world. Hopefully these quizzes will help build a vocabulary of terms and concepts that you'll need to be familiar with if you want to pursue a career in this kind of work. Your last assignment for this week is to create an HTML web document. But I want you to do this using a text editor like Notepad. Although web designers don't need to be experts in writing HTML necessarily, it's very important that they know enough about HTML to fix it when it breaks. And as you'll soon discover, it can be very difficult to fix web page problems without taking a close look at the underlying code. Don't worry, this will only be a few lines of code, but I think it will give you a good idea of what a web page really is and how HTML tells a web browser how to display the content. After you have completed your document, I want you to submit that file to me for grading. To give you an idea of what I'm looking for in this assignment, I'd like you to follow along with me and we can create this HTML document together using Notepad. Once Notepad is opened, simply type in the following: my first web page. Now save the file to your computer, but change the file name to read like this: myfirstwebpage.html. Notice that I've changed the default Notepad extension .txt to .html. Now go to the location where you saved the document and double-click the file. This should open the document in your web browser. Congratulations, you've just created your first web page. Obviously, there's nothing fancy about how this web page looks, but the important thing to note here is how you were able to make this a web document simply by changing the file extension to .html. Later, when we start creating web pages in Dreamweaver, you'll find that these documents also end with the file extension .html. So what can we do with this simple web page to dress up its appearance? Well, in its current form, not much. And that's because it's missing some crucial HTML that will allow us to change the way this page looks. So let's go back to Notepad and add the missing components. One of the easiest ways to do this is to right-click on your HTML file name, or Ctrl+click for Mac users, and choose Open File in Notepad. Okay, now we're back to where we started. Let's first move our text down to make room for the code we're going to add. The first piece of HTML, or tag, that we need to add is what's called the document type declaration. And this tag goes at the very top of the page like this. After the declaration tag, we can start adding more details about the page we want to create. Let's start with the opening tag, which lets the browser know that we're building an HTML document. Now let's add a body tag to tell a browser where the content of the page begins. Now place your sentence after the body tag, since this is the content that we want to show on the page. To let a browser know where the page content ends, we need to add closing tags like this. Now the HTML for our web page is complete. However, if we were to look at this page again in a web browser, we would see that nothing has really changed. And that's because we haven't given the browser specific instructions about what to do with the text that we placed between the body tags. So let's go back in and add these special instructions now. We'll do this by first defining a font style at the top of the page, immediately following the HTML tag. Notice that we start the instructions with a head tag and a style tag. Now let's tell the browser where it should apply the style and what the particular style should be. In this example, we want the style to apply to everything that appears inside the body tags. So let's indicate that here. Now let's add instructions for what we want our text to look like. Be sure to include a closing style tag and a closing head tag. So here's what your finished code should look like. Now let's open the file again in our browser. As you can see, the browser has changed the way the font looks according to the style instructions we placed at the top of the page. Now let's add a sentence in our text that includes a link to another website. Here's how the link should appear on the page. But first we need to go back to our HTML file and add some instructions for the browser. Here's where we'll place the sentence with the link. We'll use what's called an anchor tag to tell the browser we have a link and where it should take visitors when they click. Notice the closing anchor tag here. Keep in mind that whatever text you place inside the two anchor tags will appear as a link in your web browser. Let's save the file now and then see how it looks in a browser. And if we click the link, it should take us to the website that we entered in the anchor tag. Later on in this course, you'll discover that there are hundreds of different styles and tags that you can use to tell a browser exactly how to display the content of your page. And you'll learn to create those instructions in what's called a Cascading Style Sheet, or CSS for short. But don't worry, we'll let Dreamweaver do the grunt work of generating the lines of code that you see here. I'll talk more about cascading style sheets later on in this course. For this week, I want you to practice creating your own HTML document similar to what I've just created here. Remember that I want you to use a text editing program like Notepad to write the HTML code, and then when you save the document, change the last part of the file name, which is called the file extension, from .txt to .html. This will allow you to open the document in a web browser. Now I realize that most of you are not familiar with writing HTML code, so to help you out, I've created a downloadable guide sheet that includes all of the HTML tags we've used here so far. Feel free to copy and paste these tags into your own document as needed. The guide sheet is available for you to download from the assignment page. For any of you who want to be a little more adventuresome with this assignment, you can certainly alter the tags I'm providing. Perhaps change the font family or font size to whatever you like. You can also change the link destination to another website. When you are finished with your HTML document, submit this file to me for grading. For more information about how to submit your assignments, be sure to watch my video, How to Complete Assignments, which is located on my course homepage. Well, that's it for this week. If you have any questions or concerns about the assignments, please contact me and I'll be glad to talk to you in more detail. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.